Well, hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Dan Levin, and this is Essential Questions. In the commentary on the book of Deuteronomy called the Sifrei, the rabbis look at a passage where Moses commands our people to walk in all God's ways. The book of Exodus describes God's ways, to be gracious and compassionate, patient, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, assuring love for 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, and granting pardon. And just as God is gracious and compassionate, the rabbis decree, so too you must be gracious and compassionate. As the book of Psalms recites, Adonai is faithful in all God's ways and loving in all God's deeds. So just as the Holy One is faithful, so you too must be faithful. As the Holy One is loving, you too must be loving. And so there is this idea that we must always be striving as best we can to participate in what we call imitatio Dei, to try to somehow imitate the way that the ideal of what existence is, what God is how we will be. And so our tradition gives us this time of year, the month of Elul and the celebration of the High Holy Days, to think about how we have measured up against that standard, how we chose to use the gift of life that was given us, and how we let ourselves and each other down in our lack of performance in the best way we knew how to be, and how we achieved the best we could possibly be in the choices that we made. I once had a wonderful English professor named Fred Bush of blessed memory. He taught a class called Reading and Writing Short Fiction, and we were asked to write a bunch of short stories. I wasn't all that good at it. So when I would meet with him to go over my work, he would sit down with me and say, well, let's see what we've written here. And the High Holidays is often thought of a grand moment of meeting like that. It's as if we are invited into God's court where the Holy One will open up the book of life, take a look at all that we chose to do and say, well, let's see what we've written here. But who are the people who lead us into that court on high? Who are the people who guide us through the experience of approaching God's presence in worship and prayer? Our tradition calls them shlichei tzibur, literally those whom the community sends as messengers. A shliach or shlichat tzibur is the one who leads us in prayer, who not only gives voice to the ancient words of our High Holy Day liturgies, but who also lends melody and blends harmony so that those words lift our souls on high. All of us in the month of Elul seek to prepare ourselves for this grand moment of meeting. We use this month for introspection and reflection to do a deep dive into the core of our identity, who we are, who we chose to be, and who we might seek to become as we grow and evolve in life. And perhaps as we discover what it takes to lead a congregation in prayer, we might learn a lot about how we all can be intentional and deliberate, and how we prepare to celebrate the new year and approach the season of atonement. And so today we are so grateful that my partners and colleagues, Michelle Auslander Cohen and Cantor Jake Harris, are our guests today. Michelle Auslander Cohen serves as Cantorial Soloist at Temple Beth. A native of Skokie, Illinois, Michelle studied opera and vocal performance at such prestigious academies as Peabody Conservatory, Indiana University, and the Sarasota and Cincinnati Young Artist programs. In addition to her work with our Early Learning Center and B'nai Mitzvah students, she also works with Temple Bethel's singing groups and leads our women's spirituality programming. She is a highly talented composer of award-winning Jewish music and has worked in the community and around the country teaching vocal technique and liturgical music for Hazimir National Youth Choir and the North American Jewish Choral Festival. Cantor Jake Harris grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, before settling in Boca Raton at Temple Beth. Jake is an extraordinary talent on guitar and attended the Longy School of Music at Bard College, where he studied voice, piano, and composition. He has also studied at Hebrew College in Boston. His journey to spiritually rooted musical engagement has been influenced by his great-great-great-great-uncle, composer Louis Lewandowski. Jake earned his cantorial certification from the Cantors Assembly in February of this year, and not only leads our teen and adult choirs, but is perhaps the most popular superstar at Temple Bethel's Early Learning Center. You can't imagine the number of children who go home and grab a play guitar so that they can imitate and pretend to be Cantor Jake. So, Michelle and Jake, thanks so much for coming to be with us for
Thank
the
you so
podcast
much.
today.
So much, Dan.
So, I kind of want to start, Michelle, in helping us understand, how did you fall in love with the synagogue? How did you fall in love with Jewish music? And what is it about leading Jewish music that was so compelling to you that you chose that for your career?
I come from a family of all Jewish musicians. I came from a mother who taught in all of the Jewish day schools in the Chicagoland area, Jewish music, and in all of the synagogues. And my mother's cousin was the same. My mother's cousin was the Jewish music educator at Solomon Schechter Day School for 40 years. My life was just always filled and rooted in Jewish music. However, I did not go to a synagogue where I had a cantor. And so the idea of being a cantor was never on my radar, strangely enough, because I never had a role model to show me what that means. This career path and this way of life kind of found me more than I found it. Once I got married, I had been running around singing opera and loving every moment of it, but I knew that I wanted a more stable life. And when I met Yaniv, my husband, who lives in Boca Raton, I had an opportunity to start singing at a synagogue on Friday nights. And by chance, I happened to know all the melodies because these were all melodies I grew up with. And that was the beginning of my love affair with becoming a spiritual leader of a congregation through music.
How about for you, Jake? What was it from your experience growing up in the Boston area that helped you to fall in love with synagogue life and wanting to be a cantor?
Well, I was one of, I think, 3 Jews in my elementary school class. This was, I think, fifth or sixth grade. And most of them didn't know any Jews outside of the ones that they knew in school. And for some reason, there was this aura around being Jewish at that particular school that it really was uncool. And we were doing a survey of world religions, and the teacher was asking parents from the class if anybody had connections to houses of worship that they could bring the class to. And my mom jumped right on that because my mom and dad were very involved at my home temple Ohave Shalom in Brookline, Mass. And the cantor there was Rabbi Solomon, who's actually going to be visiting Temple Beth for my consecration weekend in November. He was my childhood cantor. And I remember we went with the class with these kids who had found everything to single me out about for my looks and my religious practices. If I had to go to religious school on Tuesday and they were going to play sports, they say, "Oh, look at Jake the Jew going to play with the rest of your Jew friends at Hebrew school." And they didn't understand what they were saying at that point, but it really hurt, and it made me hide being Jewish and not ever want to talk about it. I didn't want to have curly hair. I just wanted to look and be like everyone else. And one day we go to our shul and we have Rabbi Solomon in the sanctuary. It's this big, big sanctuary, classical reform style with a very tall dome. And I remember high holy day services, I would always look up at the dome when Cantor Solomon was singing. And I would get this tingle going down my spine that would then travel into my fingertips. And I felt this presence of something. And I didn't have a word for it. I didn't have any sort of feeling about God at that point in my life. And then all these kids who had been ripping on me were sitting there in that sanctuary, and Rabbi Cantor Solomon, as I always call him, still do, he sang, and his voice hit the air in the sanctuary, and it bounced around and reverberated off of the dome and came back, and all of these kids are just staring up in awe. And after we left the sanctuary and went back to our school, they just couldn't stop telling me how amazing that was. They said, I'd never seen anybody sing like that. I've never heard anything so beautiful. And that translated for me to be a moment that you can cut through the hatred, you can cut through the lack of understanding and rise above it using the power of this music. And what better setting than in the temple that I'd grown up going to feel that special feeling.
I love that story. I think about when I grew up, also kind of in a small synagogue where the cantor was actually a woman who played guitar. Sound familiar, Jake? And I didn't know that synagogues had organs. I didn't know that synagogues had choirs. I thought that was all perfectly normal. I remember going to Adam Bernstein's bar mitzvah at Washington Hebrew Congregation, this old classical reform congregation with the thundering organ and this huge choir and this booming cantor's voice, and thinking, what is this? Right? I remember I went home, my mom said, how was it? I said, well, Adam did great, but that wasn't Reform Judaism, because that wasn't my experience. Our congregation had kind of grown out of a chavarah. But, I think about how when I was like 8 years old, the rabbi was doing kind of like, instead of a sermon, a dialogue with the congregation around something. And he asked a question, and all of a sudden my hand went up, and he called on me. And he wanted to know what I thought. And I said whatever I said. I don't remember what the question was or what my answer was, but it wasn't too babyish. And I remember feeling so validated, like I belong here, like my presence matters here, like what's going on up on the bima is not apart from me, but that I'm involved in that. And I think that there is this unfortunate way in which classical Reform congregations and in our synagogue also has set up its architecture. A traditional synagogue puts the bima in the middle of the room as opposed to in the front of the room. And there is something about being in the front of the room, standing opposite the congregation as opposed to a part of the congregation that creates that sense of distance, I think. So when you lead worship, Jake, how do you try to bridge that distance? How do you try to take this congregation that's staring up at you and try to invite them to participate in prayer and to make them feel a part of what's happening?
From being in service situations, especially from a musical standpoint, we think a lot about familiarity and the comfort that comes with familiarity and repetition. And the one tool that I think is invaluable for this type of setting is rhythm. And when I play guitar, this is actually something I learned from Dave Grohl, Nirvana and Foo Fighters. And he said, when I play guitar, because he was the drummer in Nirvana, but then he became the front man of the Foo Fighters. And he said, I treat the guitar like a drum set. The lower strings are like the kick drum and the toms, and the upper strings are like the snare. So if you listen in services, like we'll all be on the bima tonight, we have a drummer. We have a full rhythm section, which is an amazing luxury, and it's incredible, the musicians that we get. And I'm still playing the drums with my hand. And so that's the baseline for then everything else to happen on top of it. And then you start to break the fourth wall. Because as you said, Dan, the architecture doesn't really support a communal experience, so we have to manufacture that. And I think about architecture, it's a great parallel to sports, because everybody plays sports. You can play a pickup game of soccer, and then you have a stadium that fits 50,000 people. And when the game gets so intense and when a high level of professionalism happens, a lot of people want to come see it. So we are in our worship spaces in communal settings and big high holy day grand settings. So it has to do with singing from the heart after you've established a rhythmic baseline. And to sing from the heart, and I think we'll extrapolate more on this as we go on, there's a lot of preparation that goes into singing that has nothing to do with the moment you open your mouth on the bima. So when you're getting ready to sing from the heart to bring people in and to inspire their hearts to want to join in, most of that preparation happens beforehand.
So Michelle, coming from a background in opera, I've been blessed to see a number of different gorgeous opera performances. And one of the things that I am never invited to do, thank God, is to sing along, right? Even if the arias or the music is familiar, as it is to many, many people, especially when you go to operas that are well known, the expectation is that you're going to be an active participant as a listener, as opposed to as someone who's singing along. And so I'm curious to know, from your background in vocal performance and in opera, how do you also seek to engage the congregation in a worship experience, balancing the, let's call it, active listening component of worship with the, hey, sing with me component of worship? How do you sort of do those two things in a way that balances and dovetails with each other?
I think first and foremost, I get up on the bima and I look at people and I smile, because for me, when I smile, I feel happier and I feel more at ease and I feel comfortable. And I feel myself, so that I'm not someone else up there doing a performance. I'm me doing what I feel blessed to be put on this earth to do. I've been fortunate enough to train in opera, which I feel singing is an incredibly spiritual practice. And I know we may touch on it later, but with our instruments being inside us and trying to figure out something you can't see, that process for me is a deep process of faith and belief. I do my best to translate that no matter what I'm singing. If I'm singing Vishamru or I'm singing La Boheme, the process of using my best self to get the message and the point across of whatever I sing is the same. So I feel that if I can be authentic and share my passion and my love and my faith, no matter what I'm singing, my hope is that who's ever in the room will also feel that.
So let's talk a little bit about that, Michelle. You talk about this idea of carrying your instrument inside your body. Jake carries his instrument on a strap around his shoulder, but he also has his voice. And you also play the keyboard, which is an extension of literally your hands. But your primary instruments as singers are inside you, as is your soul and your spiritual being. So help me and all of us understand what goes into preparing to sing as a leader of worship. How do you prepare, not just physically, though I think we're all kind of curious about that too, but how do you also prepare spiritually to ascend the bema to lead a congregation in worship?
First and foremost, the basics have to be covered as far as preparation. And when I say the basics, I mean I have to make sure that I get good night's rest, right? Like sleep is significant in how we perform and everything. But because our instruments are inside us, they're part of our bodies. And when our bodies are tired, they can't perform at as high of a level as they could as if they're well rested. So just on a very basic level, I pay much more attention to my sleep habits leading up to the high holidays, but that has a ripple effect of, well, I'm sleeping more, which means I'm taking time more to prepare to go to sleep. And what does that involve? It may involve a little bit more downtime. And in that downtime, I become more reflective. And like there's just a very organic process of introspection that happens leading up to the high holidays that's so connected to how we take care of our bodies and how our bodies are related to our emotional well-being. I think as far as the instrument being inside you, as I mentioned, it's in order to perform well, you have to be rested, but you have to know your voice and you have to know what works and what doesn't. And that takes an extra level of sensitivity that in any other time of the year, we may be too busy to pay attention to. But because we're performing music we may not normally do on a higher, grander scale, and perhaps with more at stake, I pay extra special attention to how I'm taking care of my voice inside me. It comes with so much faith and so much trust that I'm proudly 49 years old. I spent the better part of the decade of my 20s and into my 30s probably spending hours a day in a practice room practicing, recording, listening so that I can get up before Kol Nidre and have absolute faith in the note that I'm about to produce will have the effect that I want it to.
I'm thinking as you're describing that process, how the Talmud describes how the high priest on the first day of Elul would go into seclusion and would spend the next 40 days preparing himself to do this awesome thing, which was to walk into the Holy of Holies, stand before the Ark of the Covenant in the presence of God, and beseech the Creator of the universe to allow us to atone, to allow us to grow and learn so that we could become the vessels for God's light and spirit that we were destined to be. And that's not something that you just sort of wake up in the morning and do.
And just to add to it, I have always felt that the process of singing is so deeply spiritual because it's miraculous. Our voices, our vocal cords are somewhere between the size of a dime and a nickel. And an opera singer can get up without a microphone and be heard over a 60-piece orchestra. right? Like, how incredible is that we can train something so small to produce such great things? And I always feel like that inspires me to want to do my best and to want to give it the due respect and care in order to sing as beautifully as I can.
So, Jake, tell us a little bit about what goes into your preparations for the High Holy Days. And what is it that you do to prepare yourself physically for that? What do you do to prepare yourself emotionally for that, intellectually? What is it that you do to prepare yourself spiritually to ascend the Bema and to lead us in worship?
Well, I always tap back into my past and I go back to my earlier reality of feeling and perhaps being, but more feeling like the underdog. And I didn't grow up engaged with music classically at all. I didn't really learn how to read music until after high school. I didn't really start playing piano seriously until after high school. And guitar, I only started picking it up again when I started working in temples, so about like 5 or so years ago. But I played when I was younger. But I got rejected from every music school I applied to except one that was down the street from my parents' house. And when I decided to get into liturgical music after that experience with Cantor Solomon and finding out about my family and the lineage that I happened to be connected to, I started to feel like I had a little bit of belonging somewhere, that I could do music and it would be legitimate in a certain way. So as the High Holy Days approach each year, I remember the moment that I felt cast aside by everyone and everything in the world of music and had no belonging. And I put on it's so silly. I put on the Rocky theme. Dun 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 dun. And before I came to Bethel, I'll admit, and I hope the listeners will forgive me, I was a little bit cynical about Elul because when you hear about something all the time and you don't really understand it, and you hear it again and again and every year, and then you think, whatever, it can't be that special. So when I came to Temple Bethel and all my colleagues, you guys, Elul's coming. I said, what's this Elul? What's this Elul? Obviously, I knew what it was, but I'd never used it as a spiritual practice. But this year, I said, you know what? I'm going to take 30 days leading up to the High Holy Days and bring together all of the disciplines that I think would make me better that I never actually do, like doing yoga and meditation and drinking a ton of water and swimming and vocalizing, moving my voice every day. Because there's another consideration, and Michelle and I talk about this all the time with range, where sort of the high, low notes are in the song. And on Shabbat, it's a very communal experience. And so we tend to take the key of the song and make it lower so that we can all sing together. And there's a lot of beauty that comes from that communal singing. The High Holy Day music is a lot higher, and it uses a way different part of your voice. So we are in service of the people no matter what. So if we want to serve them well in Shabbat, we sing lower than maybe what would be comfortable for us because we get an amazing communal experience and we get to hear the voices of the congregation rising up in the space. And there's few things more spiritual than that. But then on the High Holy Days, there's a lot more of the reflective time where the congregation wants to sit back and listen to the music. And the execution of that higher, more demanding music has to be in tip-top condition. So training, again, it's like you come to that point in the year and you say, oh my God, we have 30 days, we have 60 days to the High Holy Days. I need to be able to sing G's and A's. And there's not a lot of spiritual component to that aside from the faith that you talked about, Michelle, is that you get up there, you open your mouth, you think, you breathe, and you sing. And you look at people, and when they enjoy it, if you come off the bema and you are able to say thank God for the ability to be in community with people and inspire them, then I think the preparation has been good. Because the one thing I never want to do is sing for singing's sake and just have people listen because it's some technical spectacle.
And it's interesting, I think that in my experience, cantors that are just singing notes on a page, when they hit all the right notes, but there's no emotion behind it, it's just the technical performance, you can tell and you can feel it. It's different. And you may have a cantor who may have less technical skill, but puts their full kishkas into what's being expressed, and you feel it totally differently, even if the technique is less impressive, because it's the spirit. And I want to talk about that for a minute. You talked about hitting the A's and the G's. but I also think that there's a lot of Aleph, Bets, Gimels, and Daleds that you have to hit too. And I think that, there's this amazing experience that happens over the spiritual history of the Jewish people, where we think about this moment of meeting at Mount Sinai between the creator of the universe and the energy that spawned the whole universe into being, and this one people in an historical moment, and what they learned from being at one with each other, what they learned in being in tune with that wavelength that the Holy One broadcasts on, for lack of a better term. And the product of that transcendent experience was what we call Torah. And the Torah is Hebrew. It's human language. It's human concepts. It's 365 you shall nots and 248 you shalls, all of which, in addition to all the narrative, is an artistic, in some ways, expression of what a people felt when they were in dialogue with the Holy One. And there is this sense sometimes that I feel that, like the mitzvot, the commandments, were like the instruction manual that people in ancient times were trying to give to our people. If you keep Shabbat and make it holy, you too can have that transcendent experience. If you honor your father and mother, if you leave the edges of your field for the vulnerable, if you perform those 613 commandments, that's the instruction manual for living a life that is singularly transcendent. And then when the temple was destroyed and we transformed our pathways of connectivity from the cult of the sanctuary to what we call a mikdash ma'at, that smaller sanctuary, our homes, what became the synagogue, and used the vehicle of prayer and worship and liturgy to make up for the connectivity that the sacrifices afforded, that those prayers were also gifts of art that were kind of the expression of the soul to say, this is what a sunset means. This is what love is for me. This is how I express love to God. This is what redemption means, and so forth, in the different ways that the liturgy captures the depth and breadth of human experience. And then some geniuses said, these words will lift us in a completely different way if we apply melody to them, if we don't just recite them, but we sing them, we express them with all of the gifts that musicality can give. And, it's one thing if I said, Avinu Malkeinu Shema Kolenu, Avinu Malkeinu Chatanu Lefanecha, Avinu Malkeinu, we have, please hear our voice, Avinu Malkeinu, we have sinned before you. Boy, isn't that lousy. But if I asked you to give us a good Janowski, right? Avinu Malkeinu. I'm not going to do this for you. Yeah,
do it. You said you wouldn't be singing at the opera?
No, I'm not doing it this year, but you will, right? So what happens to you when you take these ancient vehicles of spiritual expression, and the vehicles may be the words and maybe the melodies, and the melodies may have been composed 10 years ago or 10 minutes ago or 10 centuries ago? How do you inhabit those things and then give them, lead us with them, help us to hop aboard, for example, with you so that we can ride them for whatever they give us? I know I'm giving you a good word salad there, but for me, this is kind of like how I really think about prayer.
There's another element to this, and I think it plays into another, you're using a lot of musical terms when you're describing God and the frequency and the idea of spontaneity and improvisation, and not allowing our tefillah to become fixed, as we're commanded to do in the Mishnah.
When you talk about everything you just talked about and the incredible history that we come from, the first thing I feel is just an overwhelming sense of humility, of, oh my gosh, how did I get to be a part of this? After I feel that humility and insane gratefulness that not only did I get to be a part of this, I get to do it here. And I get to do it in a community with all my best friends around me and with this life I've created with our Temple Beth community. And it's incredibly humbling. And I remember there was one year, a few years ago, because really for me, what happens, especially a few days before the holidays, is I just go into such an incredible place of gratitude. I remember I wrote the board one year, and I said it's as if right before Kol Nidre starts, my eyes are closed, and I literally feel like I am plugging myself into everybody in the room, and I'm just trying to feel whatever everyone is feeling and all of their hopes and their dreams for a new year. And um, then I have an incredible responsibility to be the one sent as a shlicha to pray on behalf of everybody. It's a huge imposter syndrome that goes on for me for a while. And then I realized, no, I did spend a better part of a decade and a half in a practice room by myself so that I can rise to the occasion. And then I surrender and have complete faith and trust that the people who put me in this position hopefully knew what they were doing, and I go for it. But it's a roller coaster of emotions that mostly have to deal with humility for me.
Jake, when you think about, and I know that you study liturgical history, and I know that you study musical phenomenology. I'm not even sure that's the right word, but I hear you talk about that even with bar bat mitzvah kids when you bless them. So describe for us sort of what is that experience of sharing that great music? What goes through you? Is it a technical thing? Is it a non-technical thing? What happens to you when you're singing these great works?
Depending on which particular selection it is, it evokes a different feeling in me. I like to, we were singing Avinu Malkeinu, so I think about that a lot. And the pleading nature of the prayer and the physical aspect of the melody going up and up and up, and then you're hitting this note. And high, low isn't what matters. Commitment and heart is what matters in that moment. And this profound expression of hear us and answer us for we've wronged. I mean, that moment when I'm sending that note, I'm thinking about myself, and I'm thinking not in a vain way, but I'm thinking about all my shortcomings. And I'm trying to bring those to the forefront with utmost humility to be vulnerable in the moment. Because getting back to the idea of singing from the heart and opera, and Michelle and I have talked about this too with opera. Another factor between opera and liturgical music is the character, that you're putting on makeup or a mask or a costume to become something else. And while we put on our robes that are different from our normal Shabbos garb, I think that we're trying to be the most ourself that we can in that moment, as opposed to opera. So in the liturgical setting, like I was looking for this selection for Avinu Malkeinu. They say Rabbi Akiva had composed it, CE 40 to 135 sort of area around there about the fast day. And so when people write the music, that's what I'm thinking about too, is you have somebody that committed their life to be able to take melodies and affix them to words to inspire them. You had another person who devoted their life to create the words. So everybody is like you. And speaking of B'nai Mitzvah, one thing that I always love that you talk about, Dan, is the Shalshelet HaKabbalah, the chain of Jewish tradition from generation to generation. And you have become a very strong link in that chain. It's the same idea that I'm living today in 2024, singing music that Janowski penned X number of years ago on words that Rabbi Akiva penned X number of years ago. And the ability to form language and have knowledge was given to humanity however many years before that. So I'm entering in, I'm just one piece of that. And the sending of the note is then giving it to the next moment or the next generation. I hope that people hear it and are inspired by it to either do good deeds, to reflect on who they are and who they can become, or to maybe get involved in music and become a cantor.
What I think about is this balance that you have between preparation that's a singular function and preparation that is part of the community. So for you as cantors, there's a lot of singular preparation, you alone in a practice room or in the sanctuary, wherever you sort of do your internal work. Then there's the work with our choirs, right? And then there's the work that you do just being part of the community. And I think about, for myself, it's sort of a mix of the same, right? Some of the work that I do to prepare for the holidays is a lot of sitting alone and reading. Some of it's in dialogue with other colleagues or thought partners in thinking about, well, how do you look at this and how do you read this? And our colleagues here as well. And then, a lot of it is communal. I spent a lot of time in preparation for the holidays on the phone calling people in my life to ask their forgiveness and to atone. The work at the synagogue continues to go on, whether it's the day before Rosh Hashanah or not. So, what is your spiritual preparation for the holidays as just a plain old Jew? And how do you weave your own personal preparation for the holidays into your cantorial preparation for the holidays? In what ways are those things distinct, and in what ways are those things similar or woven together?
It's a little bit of a sacrifice, but I never have any family meals over the holidays. Right. And that's a key part for many people of what the holidays are. It's the Rosh Hashanah dinners, it's the breakfasts, it's all these things. I eat alone the whole time. And there actually used to be a time that Cantor let me I stayed at her house for the majority of our 10 days of the high holidays because I have the most wonderful family and also they need me a lot. And during that time, I'm not as emotionally available for them. And I need to sit in quiet as a person. And I kind of leave them for a while, and thank God, Yanni picks up the pieces and we live in a village that helps. But that's my own preparation is just that a lot of solitude, and then whatever energy I have needs to be put into then preparing whoever else is involved with our choirs or giving the support to whoever else needs it around me that's also trying to accomplish the same thing. One of the things about the choirs that I've found, in our family participation, when we have kids getting up and leading, this is a first for them. And they're standing in front of hundreds of people. It's not even the same as a Friday night. One of the differences, I'm sorry, I'm veering off just a little bit, but one of the differences between singing and playing an instrument is, as we said, it's inside you, but it's also the most vulnerable form of performance because you can't hide behind anything. Even I know if I'm playing piano, I'm standing in front of a big instrument, or if you're playing guitar, you can be focused on looking at your hands and on the guitar. But when you're just singing, it's just you. And there's something so significant about that moment that it's really just me. And I truly believe that the kids in the choir that get up to sing also feel that. And I do my best to inspire that message to them that this is you, yourself, and I, and we're doing this all together, bringing in this very sacred moment for our community. So in order for me to have the energy to do that, I really have to retreat from my own life a bit and spend a lot of alone time.
I go full send for the congregational aspect, and I've throughout the years that I've been doing this, the few years, I'm still early on, but I like, for example, Friday night at Shabbat, we celebrate, and then Saturday, there's a mini or b'nai mitzvah or Torah study. It's not really Shabbat for me at all. On Friday and Saturday, it's work, it's holy work, and I love it. But then Monday, which is our day off, I treat that like the Shabbat day, where I can really be my own version of Shomer Shabbos and do my best within reason to put the phone down, not do anything, and be able to reflect. And for the high holy days, it's the same thing. Once Ne'ilah is over and the break fast hits, usually we have a day after. And I use that as my day of reflection because the technical demands for the coordinating the choirs and being there for other people, as you say, are so great. And the physical part of it too. I mean, I treat it like we just watched the Olympics. Every time I saw track and field or I'd watch gymnastics, I'd be like, oh my God, the high holy days are coming. So I'm training full in physically, a lot of it with the cardio stuff because to get the air moving. So music and singing are my spirituality. So it's like that brings me to a higher place more so than anything else. So it gets me there, and then I take the time after to be able to rest and reflect.
I think that there is always, for us as clergy, this balance between being present technically so that we do what we planned to do as powerfully as we hope to do it, and at the same time investing ourselves fully in the moment so that we ourselves are praying. It's hard to ask other people to pray if we ourselves aren't praying along with them. And I was thinking, Michelle, as you were talking about the vulnerability of offering your voice, it's not a dissimilar vulnerability that the rabbis have when they offer what's rolling around in their kishkas in a sermon. And I think it's the same vulnerability that all of us have when we expose ourselves to our closest family members or our dearest friends, when we ask forgiveness or when we admit to some mistakes, or even when we just expose ourselves to our conception of God and say, "You who are the creator of the entire universe, take a look in me and help me see what's in there for good, and help me to grow to be the best version of my most authentic self," which is not always easily accomplished and not always safe to do. I think a little bit about this year as we get ready for the holidays and how the events of this last year, especially since Simchat Torah and October 7th, have been living in us as Jews and all of the complexity that this year has meant for us, and all of the different ways that we individually and collectively are carrying the traumas that we feel in our community, that we feel as being part of the Jewish people, that we feel as being citizens of the world, and inhabiting as much anguish and pain and tragedy as we have witnessed. And I'm wondering how that is living within you, and is that something that you use as you prepare to lead worship, that you try to compartmentalize and set aside, or is that something that fuels you in the way that you'll be a different kind of prayer leader this year?
I myself feel incredibly fueled by it. I feel an enormous sense of pride, of gratitude that I'm living in a place that allows me to be Jewish in a safe space. I feel like I'm not alone in this, but that I'm carrying the weight of the world with me. There's a scene at the end of Schindler's List where Schindler breaks down and just starts saying, "I could have done more. I could have done more." And I a little bit live with that every day, thinking, I can do more. I can do more. And so that, just as far as bringing more attention to what happens, honoring the memories of the victims, educating everything, bringing Israel more into my life and in our congregation. I have no doubt that the enormity of all those feelings will affect how I feel when I pray, and obviously we're all praying, the safety and the existence of Israel, I think, is at the top of all of our minds. That definitely will be a part of my prayers when I'm singing Shema Kolenu.
Yeah, that's a big question, and it gets me into sort of a philosophical thought process about the idea of God hearing prayers and God as a idea, as a deity, as a leader of a people, especially in the Torah times. And I just, I want to put the responsibility back into the hands of the people. And sometimes if I'm too much with faith and I think about God doing things for me or listening or not listening, it opens up a tough philosophical conundrum. Because if God is going to listen to this plea, why didn't God hear the plea of others who are in much worse situations than me, or worse situations than what's going on across the world? That's a big, there's some dissonance and some biblical criticism that goes into it, because why now? Am I going to line up my singing so spiritually that finally God will hear? Somebody in the congregation, is going to sing and finally God will hear and be able to right these wrongs? Or do we really pray as we're B'Tselem Elohim, we're in the image of God, we're praying for our own strength and realities so that we can make decisions as people collectively? And I think that being in a congregation, especially as a rabbi, I mean, we're cantors, I think we're softening their hearts so the rabbis can really drive the point home.
I think there is a feeling that I am carrying this year also of a sacred sense of responsibility and duty to say something that matters. I think in this moment where we're all carrying a lot of heartache and we're all yearning for a different kind of tomorrow, and we're leaning heavily on our tradition and our sense of connection as Jews, there is a sense that I think I feel that I want this year's holidays to really touch and inspire and invigorate people's spiritual selves so that we can meet the moment. We can meet the moment as Jews. We can meet the moment for our people. We can meet the moment with all of the moral challenges that present us in this moment. And that's hard. As you enter into the new year, and as you think about your own place, not just in your careers, but in your lives, what are the essential questions you're asking yourself this year?
I'm thinking about how are we going to bring in the extremes for a time of greater understanding between people. And in the temple and in our services, we have these universal tools, the power of the spoken word, music, food, not bring it except Yom Kippur, but still make the joke. So I think that we need to find ways to bring in the extremes. People are not always going to agree on everything, but the polarization in so many different areas in the world and in our country is so great that what are we going to do to soften the edges a little bit? And I think that's why I think when we engage in things that are universal as Jews, like singing and speaking and eating, we show the people that we're so not that much different than you. And we love beautiful things, and we care about our kids and their education. We want them to live good lives. So, and that's, I think it's essential for us to get the message. If we feel that we have this beautiful message and this unbelievable teaching, if we get it out there to people and show them how universal it is, and it's not a Jewish value, it's a universal value that Jews happen to laud and revere, then hopefully that can soften those sharp edges of the extremities of society to bring people closer.
I think there's probably a personal aspect to the essential questions and maybe a professional one. I don't remember even at this point which one you asked. My essential question as far as what am I doing with my career and my life, especially right now, is how can I help people feel the love that I feel for being Jewish? What does that mean? What does love for Judaism mean for them? How is it different? How is it the same? Just how can I share in a way that's meaningful is a big essential question that I ask myself every day. There are other essential personal questions that I think that the what's happening in the world forces me to ask myself. There's a poem that I know you read a lot, is often read at funerals. It's a fearful thing to love what death can touch. And with death feeling so close for so many reasons, whether it's Israel or the gun violence that we also just experienced or anything, how do we go through every day loving and trusting, knowing that it can all be taken away from us so fast?
Cantor, Jake Harris, Michelle Auslander, Cohen, our wonderful cantorial soloist. I am truly looking forward to spending these holy days with you and wishing you both a meaningful Elul and, God willing, a healthy and happy Shana Tova, a good sacred New Year. The Essential Questions podcast has been made possible by the Temple Beth Jewish Ideas Incubator, committed to creativity and innovation in modern Jewish life. Many thanks to our production team, Jason Reeser, Amanda Brenzel, and Natalie Cohen. You can find this podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, and the Podbean app, as well as on Temple Bethel's website, tveboca.org/essential questions. Share this podcast with your friends, rate us on Apple Podcast or Spotify to spread the word. And we want to know, what are your essential questions? Let us know by emailing us at eq@tveboca.org. I'm Rabbi Dan Levin, and thanks for listening to the Essential Questions podcast.